Fall is here and so are the pumpkins. And if you've ever wondered how to use up a pumpkin once it starts getting to the point where you need to use it or lose it, I'm going to give you 6 easy recipes here that will hopefully give you some great options for how to use that pumpkin. Start by prepping your pumpkin. You're going to cut it in half, take out the seeds, set those seeds aside so you can roast them later on. Then take a baking dish, add a little bit of water into the bottom of the baking dish, about 1/4 of an inch, and add in your pumpkin. You're going to put it face side down, and this is going to steam very nicely at 350 degrees for about 30 minutes. While that steams, you can go ahead and get to work on rinsing off those seeds. Oh, and did you want to know what I'm going to use in these recipes? Well, this is what I'm going to use. I've got 1 ear of corn, 1 pack of Butterball turkey kielbasa, 1 purple onion, 2 green bell peppers, 1 pack of the Ben's original wild rice, 1 garlic parmesan flavor packet, a 2-pound bag of flour, and a jar of the Alfredo sauce. Now you can see that our pumpkin is nicely steamed. I went ahead and let it cool off, that way it didn't burn my fingers when I flipped it over, and it can cool off completely before you use it. That will make it a lot easier to slice if you have that as an option. I went ahead and sliced it like you would a cantaloupe, and then I sliced the pumpkin off and cut it into chunks, at least part of it. Some of it we're going to use mashed up in various recipes, and others we're going to want those chunks for the larger pieces of pumpkin in our dishes. And while we're on the topic of pumpkin, what is you all's favorite way to use up leftover pumpkin from Halloween? Comment below and let me know. Now we're going to get started on this sheet pan meal. I lined a baking dish with some aluminum foil and added on some of the pumpkin. Then I sprinkled on large chunks of that purple onion, and I'm going to go ahead and cut half of this corn into wedges. You really could cut this corn however you feel like, or even keep it as a whole half if you felt like it, but I wanted to try out the wedges just for look's sake. The other half of the corn I'm just slicing off the cob, and we're going to throw that in with our stir-fried rice in a later dish. I went ahead and cut up my bell pepper. One of them I sliced in half and just de-seeded. Those will be our stuffed peppers. Then I have a little pile of cubed, some with large chunks. This will be great for our sheet pan, as you can see the size difference. And a few that are just going to be slivers for some garnish and some for our later dish. I went ahead and sprinkled those peppers evenly onto our sheet pan. Next up, I got started on the kielbasa. I took both of these and cut them into 6 different segments because we have 6 different meals we're going to be making with this. One of the segments I cut into fairly large chunks and sprinkled those over the sheet pan. The other 2 of the segments I went ahead and minced up as small as I could. This is going to be perfect in our fried rice. Then I made these cute little octopuses, or octopi, I think. I've seen them in a couple of different Japanese videos where you take the hot dogs and you cut them like this, and then when you fry them they kind of splay out and look kind of like a little octopus, and I thought it'd be cute on one of our dishes. And then this one I cut very thinly, and then this other segment I julienned, or I'm not sure if it's called julienne. I cut it on a slant. What kind of slice is that called? Comment below if you know. I did not go to cooking school, I just cook a lot, so I enjoy it. But here is our wild rice. As you see on the back, it already made it into peppers in the picture, so you know it's going to be good for that. So I went ahead and followed the directions, just added in the water. I added some butter into a little dish to start getting started on the topping for our sheet pan dish. And I added in a tablespoon of this garlic parmesan. I really like this garlic parmesan. It's heavy on the garlic, so just note that it is heavy on the garlic. You might get some garlic breath from it, but it was delicious. So I just went ahead and drizzled it over top of our whole sheet pan meal, and this really flavored it nicely. I did also add some salt and pepper, as even though this garlic parmesan does have some salt in it, it's not quite as salty as it would need to be to fully flavor the whole meal. Now, I did want to note that several of these meals are really large, so honestly, you might get closer to 10 servings, not just 6 meals. I know for those that are making meals that are just for one person, this might mean that you have food for a little longer, but having a little more isn't normally a bad thing. Then I started adding all of our veggies into the rice. I went ahead and added about 1/4 cup of these purple onions into the rice. I already added the seasoning packet in as well as the rice. Then I added both of those minced up pieces of the hot dog. I set aside the octopuses. I should look that up. I should see what it is, if it's plural or not. Anyway, I went ahead and added that in. I added in a good amount of pumpkin in there. This is going to be a very colorful meal. If I hadn't mentioned that, or if I hadn't said anything about that, I'm sure you would have noticed it by now. But I went ahead and added in the corn. I ended up adding all of it, but I did have to change the pot because as you can see, the pot is just, it's too small. I didn't calculate for how many vegetables were going to be in this meal. So once I got into a bigger pan, I added all the corn in. And oh, and by the way, all these recipes are going to be in the description box below, so don't worry if I'm not saying exact measurements out loud, because they are going to be written down, and it will be a much better way of following a recipe than me chattering as we make meals. Now I went ahead and stirred everything up. As you can see, it's very colorful and vibrant, which is kind of what I think of when I think of fall. I think something warm and cozy and also vibrant because of all the corn and the pumpkin, and I don't know, I just think of fresh vegetables for some reason. That just feels like fall to me. I went ahead and spooned spoonfuls of this into both halves of our pepper, and then I went ahead and topped it off with just a little bit of that garlic parmesan packet that you saw earlier. I felt like it would add a little extra flavor, and also it caramelized a little bit in the oven because of the parmesan that's in that, which I felt like gave it a nice little flair. I also made sure I salted those pumpkin seeds that you see on the side, as well as added a little bit of the garlic parmesan on the pumpkin seeds too, just to add a little extra flavor. These pumpkin seeds make a fantastic snack because not only are they fairly low in calories and pretty healthy, but also they take a little time to chew, so you end up eating a lot slower and you eat fewer of them. But anyway, you see these two bowls, they are perfectly delicious and colorful. And not only that, but I made 2 servings. So as you can see, what I said earlier about some of the meals making more than one meal, this is one of them. Because it definitely already made 2 portions, and I still have some left because I'm going to be using that in one of our later recipes. And here's our sheet pan. It has come out of the oven. I baked it at 400 degrees for about 20 to 30 minutes. It depends a little bit on your oven, and it especially depends on whether or not your oven is broken, because mine was broken. And so it took a lot longer because it wasn't working very well. So, and that was how I found out, was baking this meal. So surprise! Next, we're making a base for the remaining of our recipes, actually. This is going to use all of our flour, like a lot of the flour, and then all the rest as we make the rest of the recipes. So we are using a fair amount of flour in this, and what we're basically making is a very sticky dough, or a very sticky dumpling dough. I went ahead and added pumpkin as well into the dough because why not? If you're gonna make something pumpkin central, why don't you add pumpkin to everything? So I hope you guys like pumpkin because I added a lot of it into these recipes. I went ahead and heated up a griddle, just sprayed it down, and then stuck on big globs of this stuff. And as you can see, it is very sticky. If you wet your hands or a spatula or something like that, whatever you're using to spread it out, it's going to spread so much easier. I discovered that after I turned the camera off. So now I've flipped this. It's, for all intents and purposes, this is a giant dumpling. You're going to be sticking all that rice and veg on top, and then a nice sauce you're going to be spreading over the top of it. And it's going to be a very comforting rice and dumpling type of meal. I initially was planning on making tortillas, but I realized after I added in ingredients that the pumpkin added a lot more moisture than I had at first thought it would add. So I ended up realizing that the dough was going to be way too sticky to roll out, at least with the amount of flour that I had left. So I saved some of the flour so I'd be able to roll things out later on for some of our other recipes. I just topped each of these giant dumplings with a good helping of that rice mixture we made earlier, and now I'm getting started on the sauce. To start off with, I went ahead and just kind of caramelized these onions. Then I added in our jar of the pasta sauce. This is an Alfredo sauce, and just used the Great Value brand because it was the cheapest. But you could, of course, make your own if you have ingredients on hand. This is what I felt like was going to be the best bang for our buck without getting too many different ingredients that might cost a little bit more. Then I added in some pumpkin because, of course, make it a pumpkin sauce if it's going to be a pumpkin recipe. And then I added in some of that garlic Parmesan sauce, or I guess it's Parmesan seasoning. And I also added in some water just because I feel like it's a little bit thick. So add as much water as you feel like you need it to have in order to be the thickness that you want a sauce to be. Depending on your heat, you might add a little bit more because heat evaporates the water out of sauces, and you're going to top each of your plates off with some of that sauce. This makes a very delicious, comforting meal. If you are looking for something that has a little bit of a chew, these dumplings are it, because they definitely have a little bit of a chew, just like a bagel might have as far as the bread goes. I might have overmixed it a little bit, but I felt like it worked really well with the sauce because it didn't disintegrate, because it wasn't a very soft and tender bread. It was a little bit chewier. Next up, we're going to be making some ravioli. We're going to be stuffing these with that kielbasa, and also we have the pumpkin in this dough that we have out. I went ahead and well floured that surface, and I just kept working in the flour as I went. I worked quite a bit of flour into the dough just because I didn't want it to be too sticky. I wanted it to be able to be rolled out thinly enough so that we could make ravioli that weren't too thick. And I went ahead and placed off my little medallions of the kielbasa, and then you're going to go ahead and just kind of flip half of it over, and that's going to make a little rows of ravioli that you can then use your pizza cutter and just chop off the excess and then slice them into little squares. If you have a ravioli maker or a press or something like that, you could of course use that. But I am using what I got, which is hands and a pizza cutter and a board. So that's what I made, but it looks pretty cool, and I enjoyed how they turned out in the end. Now, if you are wanting a more vegetarian version of this, you could alternatively take a little bit of the pumpkin, add some seasonings to it, some salt and pepper, if you were wanting it to just be a very basic seasoning profile, or you could spice it up, add a little thyme or a little rosemary or some other herbs to it, and then you would place that in your pocket instead, and you would have pumpkin filled ravioli. So that's an option if you are wanting a vegetarian option. I also decided to try my hand at making bow tie pasta with some of it, which I just cut it into squares like you saw and pinched it. And here's our lovely bow tie pasta we have for one of our dishes, and ravioli for the other. We had a ton of the bow tie pasta, so technically that's more like 2 meals worth, but the ravioli I would say was closer to a 1 large meal rather than 2. I went ahead and salted my water. I always like to salt my pasta water just because I think it adds a little extra flavor to the pasta, and pasta tends to be a little bit bland, so I think it just adds a little something. On the back burner, I went ahead and started melting butter because we're going to be browning our little octopus. I gotta look that up. It's octopuses, guys. I'm gonna grill up those octopuses in the back. And now I'm gonna go ahead and get started on these bow tie, getting all heated up. This doesn't take very long to cook because it is fresh pasta. If you're using pasta from a box, then it's going to take a little longer to cook, but fresh pasta actually cooks quite quickly. I went ahead and sauteed up those little slivers of green bell pepper, as well as a lot of the remainder of the kielbasa. Actually, that is the remainder of the kielbasa, and the 2 octopuses. As you can see, our noodles turned out lovely. They are a little thicker than store-bought noodles would be, but I would expect that when you're rolling something out by hand, it's going to be hard to make it look like a machine did it when you're doing it by hand. I poured over some of that pumpkin sauce. It's the same sauce that I showed you how to make earlier, only I had made a very small amount in a pan because I was just making one meal at that moment. And then I went ahead and poured the rest of the sauce over my other meal, which is going to be these bow tie pastas. I will say, if you leave this meal and heat it up later, the sauce really does soak into the bow tie pasta, so just keep that in mind. You may want to keep the sauce separate so that you can have a good amount of sauce on top, or if you like things just slightly less saucy, then that might be perfect for you. But look at that color inside. Wow, the ravioli turned out great. It's my first time ever making ravioli, and I am really glad it turned out. Now for an experiment. It wouldn't be one of my videos without me trying to experiment and try something out just to see if it would work. My theory was that you could make your own gnocchi, but instead of potato, you would just use a little bit of pumpkin instead. That, however, isn't quite how I would think gnocchi should turn out, so it turned out still a little bit more like a dumpling, in my opinion at least. It didn't quite hold the gnocchi shape, as will show you in a second. It was still very sticky, of course, but I struggled trying to make that little imprintation, which I've made gnocchi before, so it hasn't failed me yet, but now it failed me. But it still turned out delicious, just not what I would call gnocchi. I guess I will still call it pumpkin gnocchi, but it's not quite that in taste, in my opinion at least. I think you would have to do some kind of combination of potato and pumpkin in order for this to turn out, and I might try that in a future recipe, but for this one, I just went with what I got. I made sure my water was boiling and added a little bit of salt in, and then as you can see, the gnocchi started to pop up to the surface when it was fully cooked through, just like regular gnocchi would, and I poured that into the remainder of my sauce, which was thinned out a little bit because I added a little water, and then I let it kind of cook and marinate a little bit, and then just kind of thicken up. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained, so I tried this out, and it turned out deliciously still, but not how I originally envisioned. However, look at these octopuses. I just love how cute they turned out, and they add a really nice pop of color to what would otherwise be a kind of bland colored dish. I ended up getting 10 meals out of all of these dishes, so for $1.47 a serving, it's not bad. Thank you all for watching again, and I will see you all in the next one.